I think for writers also to keep in mind is to understand um, where are they personally in their life, in their career, right? That's one. The second is who is the opposite party that you're dealing with? Have they in the past been fair with writers? Are they relatively new? Have they not been fair with writers, right? Some of these key finer things, contract or no contract, legal review or not, is in general important while you're interacting or working.
Miss Pooja Kapadia, welcome to the show. But look, you and I have known each other for like 5 years now, I guess. And I really admire and respect your work ethic. And it's been such a pleasure being a colleague of yours at some point. And you were heading a team of lawyers. You were the frontline warrior protecting writers' rights, producers' rights, actors' rights, right? It's such a difficult role to navigate through. And I'm just glad that, we have this chance to speak about some of the things that you have to face. And at the same time, you also have a very different background in your education. So let's start with that, right? You now today are one of the most respected, reputed lawyers in the film industry, in the entertainment industry, so to speak. But at the same time, your background did not start there. Today, you're a frontline lawyer. Today, you're one of the most respected and reputed lawyers in the entertainment industry. But it did not begin there, right? So let's start from what were you doing when you were studying? Why did you pick up the things that you did? And how did you end up here?
So thank you so much, firstly, for having me here, Sid, Neil. The point is, it's a real pleasure to be talking to you about this. And there are stalwarts in this industry. I'm really quite junior in comparison to a lot of senior lawyers in this industry, in the media space. And who've been here for like over 15, 20 years. So I'm still a long way to what you're making me sound. But I would like to say that some of this is just luck, chance, taking the right opportunity when it is, placed in front of you. There wasn't 12-year, 15-year, 18-year me who had chalked a path of life, really, from maybe becoming a lawyer initially to saying, no, I want to do molecular biology and genetics and work in a research lab, to realizing that I need to be in a space which is more interactive, where I'm talking to people, more fronting with and working with people around me versus being in more quiet spaces, which would be what I would have done if I had gone ahead with my earlier career path. So I think with time, I was a little more open to changing my trajectory and just keeping in mind that it's important to do what you genuinely enjoy. And I don't think it's passion that you need to convert into a job to make it something you're excited about. But if your day-to-day is something that you want to wake up and get out of bed for, I think that's a good start to know you enjoy it. So I think that's really what allowed me enabled me to switch from where I was to where I am today. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Were there, I want to dive into the psychology of your thinking when you were making these transitions, right? Was this a process? Was there moments you can pinpoint, like this happened, which is why I started thinking differently? Or how did it go for you?
Going back to it, let me tell you, it's not easy. It was really hard at each stage to. It gives you the jitters, especially when you talk to people and they were like, oh, why are you doing this? You have spent so much time in studying this. You've invested so much. Because my undergrad was actually not in India, so it was a foreign degree. So it was in University of Toronto. So the idea that you have spent so much of your parents' money going and staying somewhere, educating yourself abroad, all of that, and then coming back to India and why would you do that? Why would you come back to India? Why didn't you practice there? Why didn't you give it a few years over there?
Yeah.
I think at each stage, it's that fear of log kya kahenge really is a very prominent part of our ecosystem and our surrounding of the way we've been brought up, I think. So that fear was real. But I think your personal happiness is a very important and essential element of it, because if you're happy, you can give it your 100%. Otherwise, you're just doing it because you're supposed to. And I don't know as an individual, I would have enjoyed the because you're supposed to as much. So really, that was my psychology, that at every stage where I felt that this was not something I'm enjoying, it's about sitting and analyzing. And I've had, great people in my life to guide me through this in different stages, like being my university professor who said, why don't you consider patent law? And really, that's my segue from moving from where I was in university studying molecular biology, doing my research, my thesis, did all of that with her. And then was still not very excited and sat and had a candid conversation with her who said that, why don't you consider doing patent law? And I was like, hey, that's a great idea. Maybe that is what I want to do. And I researched more. It was a conversation, and she had been seeing me for over a year, understanding. We've had so many conversations. I think that was a great part of universities, when you had that coach of sorts, seeing you through your day-to-day stuff, understanding what you enjoy. And we used to have lunches, those arbitrary conversations. No, there's no agenda-related thing. And when towards the end after I submitted my thesis, etc., I did have a conversation that, I'm doing this, but I'm not enjoying it. What have you seen people who've studied this do? What are your thoughts? And she made the recommendation. She didn't say that this is something you must do. It was more like, why don't you consider this? And that's really where I started thinking, reading more. And there was law always in my blood. My grandfather was a lawyer. My great-grandfather was a lawyer. So it's inherently, I think, in our family. It's just my father was a doctor, and that's where I segued into science in that sense. So just come around, I will be saying that way. So when she said it, it just clicked very easily. And then it was a hard conversation to tell my parents I'm coming back to India.
Yeah.
And but they were very supportive at that point of time. I think I would want to say, I'm sure that some part was like, why? But they still supported me throughout. So it was great in that sense. So, and that's really helpful. I would definitely want to say, when parents are supportive, there is that ecosystem which is nurturing.
Yeah. And I think when parents do support their children's aspiration, we get like warriors like you who are protecting the rights of so many talent out there, and so many people, right? Okay. To give everyone a sense of what I mean, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and please try and answer it in as many details as possible, right? What is your schedule like?
It really depends on the day. Like, there are days I hibernate generally, but then there are days I'm up and about early in the morning, trying to finish work. There are days I'm in office for 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. It really depends. I think that's something I've seen my peers as lawyers do when I was working at law firm. And I think it goes back to my conversation on excitement, right? So most of my day really involves this. But I made a conscious effort to put an hour or 45 minutes in this madness of work days to working out and just giving myself some time to peace and quiet. So depends on the day, either a quick workout in the morning, then going to work, being at work anywhere between 6 in the evening to 10, 11, or coming home and working after a quick workout and then continuing to work. So it's really, I'm not a very organized
modest
person.
when you say all these things, right? Let's talk about day for yesterday. When did you get home?
No, I got home on time. It was just that I was up working till 3. I agree with you on that. Yeah. Though there are a few days of that sort as well.
Yeah, I love the modesty, right? I respect that. The reason why I feel like it's important to start with that context is because I've seen you do these things up close, right?
Right.
And if I were a talent and you were repping me as a lawyer, I could be, rest assured, relaxed, because I know you're out there doing your best. But then that, as a colleague, as a teammate, I always wondered, how do you take care of yourself? How do you're also married, you're living with your family, and how does the work-life balance play out in your life?
I have a very supportive family, I must say that. For all the crazy work hours they have, even during COVID, where that there were 100 household chores, I think my mom-in-law was amazing when it came to just saying, you know what, you stay in your room, you finish stuff, I will take care of a bunch of things. Or, you know, helping to work around a schedule versus saying, no, this is my way of doing things. So a supportive family in that case really, really helps. And I must give it to my husband in that one as well, though he supports me throughout. So I am blessed with people who have always nurtured and promoted or pushed me to work in that way. So it's never been a situation where anyone's told me that, why are you working these hours? I think you should quit your job. And I think that's really allowed me to grow and push the boundaries, my own personal boundaries to grow. But yeah, it is hard to have a work-life balance. And, you know, I've seen a few videos which says it's, you know, this concept of having that ideal work-life balance is somewhere that myth or a bubble. And I'm sure some people must be attaining it. I'm not saying no. But I feel it's about most of the times juggling all of this, finding that there will be some days where you have to focus more on your work and some days more on your personal life and family. And finding that work-life balance versus a ideal day-to-day work-life balance where I will only work X hours a day, or, you know, it's 6 p.m. and, you know, I don't need to work. I think if that's the concept of work-life balance, I feel somewhere that's a little flawed.
Okay.
Probably that's my mindset, but in my opinion, it's...
ideal way to describe a good work-life balance in your opinion?
I think till the time you're getting some time for yourself.
Okay.
And it's about you and how you make that time happen, right? You can give your family some time and focus on work and some passion of yours. So it doesn't mean that you have to work out plus do something which you enjoy as a passion, plus spend time with your family, plus work, plus do everything in that 124-hour window. Over the course of your week, if you feel that you have been able to do a bit of each of it and done justice to it, I feel that's a fair definition of a work-life balance. And there could be some weeks you don't get to do that. But then you compensate or try to compensate it with another week. So that's really my definition of work-life balance.
No, that's very true, right? And I think what's interesting for me in this entire, the journey that you have in terms of managing your work-life balance is that you have a supportive environment. Your people around you are very supportive of what you do. Employers obviously would love that, you know, having somebody who is willing to do what it takes to get things done. That's obviously appreciated. If you're, say, leading a team where, say, some of your peers do not have that privilege, you know, some of them, for whatever reason, are unable to go beyond a certain time during the day, and they need to be home at a certain time. They need to be spending an X number of hours every day at home. How would you manage that, given that your practice is so different from theirs?
I think everyone has their own ways of working, right? If my peer or my teammate comes and tells me that, hey, you know, I can't work after 8 p.m., that's fine. But then the 8 hours that you're working, you give it your 100%. I think really that's where it is. And then it's about understanding each person's limitation and finding ways to be more efficient or working around it. That's really where it has been. Like I've worked with peers who've had children, right? I have worked with people who are getting married. At every stage of your life, each person has their own set of responsibilities that come with each phase of your life. So I think it's about just understanding and working around it. I don't believe anyone should feel that everyone works or needs to work in the same fashion as they do.
Right.
I think it's very important to understand everyone has their own style, and till the time the work gets done, I think that's the most important. How they do it is totally dependent on each person. I know a peer of in fact ours who we worked with, and she'd wake up early in the morning and get work done because that's the most productive time of her day. So be it. You don't want to work those long hours at night. That's fine. That's as your body clock. Yeah.
Got it. No, that's interesting. So now that kind of like, okay, we have these two things where you have, okay, you are willing to do what it takes to get things done. Then you're also open to having that flexibility in terms of, you know, anybody taking a call on the work hours that are productive for them. I've seen you being a sole warrior on the legal front, handling contracts for hundreds of people. and hundreds of projects in one go, to in a couple of years having a team of people doing that. You build that team, you were very passionate about building that team, and you put in so much effort doing that, right? And I know a lot of people respect you for that, and your teammates really looked up to you. So, and that's why I'm asking you these questions, right? Because I feel like there's so much that I also got to learn, and I hope our listeners are able to take a few things from this. How did you find the right balance between, building that team? Because on one side, yeah, I think it ultimately boils down to having. Okay, so all right. On one side, yeah, it ultimately boils down to having, just the same objective of getting things done. But at the same time, not everyone is working at the same capacity as you are, or at the same expectations as you have from your team, right? Some people are sometimes underperforming, right? So how did you navigate those challenges, given where you stand in terms of expectations, and, how did you build that team?
So, firstly, you're being really modest by like putting me on this pedestal. Yeah, it was difficult setting up a team, especially during COVID. You had to manage it it was tough. I will not sugarcoat that one at all. Because it meant hiring someone remotely, training someone remotely, hours of screen share with your teammates to be on the same page on things. So it was hard. It was very hard, if I will just put it that way. But it was rewarding. I, over a period of time, can say that each of them grew to their maximum potential and are doing very well in each aspect of what they are handling today. And I'm proud of them in that fashion. And there were a few which we tried to find ways to work with. So I have also personally failed in that way, where we couldn't find that balance, and they had to move on from a very simple reason that it wasn't working out and the team needed a few things. And I think all of it boils down to how you look at your job. Do you look at it as something you have to do X, Y, Z, and that's about it? Or because you enjoy doing what it is? And it goes back to the concept on conversation on passion. And are you passionate about it? What is the amount of responsibility you feel it is versus, hey, you know what? The draft's in your inbox. My job is done. I won't check in, right? It's about that. It's about knowing very well that there's a talent sitting out there waiting for the draft. B, the fact that till we don't close that draft, the talent doesn't get paid. That responsibility needs to be on you to know very well that your talent is not getting paid while you're getting paid to work X number of hours and be comfortable.
Yeah.
And that really will push you in that way to ensure you close things faster, you turn around things faster. Because when you look at it from a talent's perspective, unlike us, at least me, who had a job, who was getting paid a salary on a month-on-month basis, they were getting paid only when they did work or only when a contract was signed and their work started. Same thing for a producer, right? If you look at it from the opposite side, their project doesn't start till the time this contractual work. So it's really looked as a big impediment as a whole. So the idea was always to work efficiently to get this part of the work done. And so if you find like-minded people as a team who understand that concept, I think that was a win-win.
I can understand. Yeah, that's. So let me ask you another question, okay? You mentioned, talent getting paid and you getting paid on a monthly basis, whereas the talent getting paid on a contract basis, right? When the contract is signed is when they get their paycheck.
Correct.
So you're under a lot of pressure to close that deal, not just from the perspective that the project should move forward, but also somebody needs to get paid, right? So actually, let's dial back a bit. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who aren't very aware of the nitty-gritties of what goes into talent representation as a lawyer.
Right.
Can we start there? Can you break it down in simple terms, what that means?
So I think talent representation from a lawyer's perspective, of course, involves understanding a contract, being a lawyer, closing the deal. And I think that's what you would think of from a lawyer's perspective or a talent's perspective, what your lawyer does. But I think it somewhere involves a little more nuances and finer details, in the sense that you have to understand the talent, at what stage of their career they are and how much they're ready to push the envelope for themselves, right? There may be those 4 or 5 things which are important to protect them. And then there are those other 15 things that are good to have. It's about understanding them, their need, and then redlining a draft from a perspective of trying to close it. Because if you're asking for the sun and the moon, there has to be justification from a producer's perspective as well. And from a writer's perspective, if their core checks and balances are in place. When I look at it, when I say that two of the most important ingredients when it comes to talent is timely payment and credits, right? They're the most essential aspects of it. The third one, which is also important in my opinion, is from a creative perspective, how much interference, etc. While contracts can't really determine the third part of it as much, it's more about your interpersonal skills with the team you work with. There could be some checks and balances towards that, but the first two are very important when it comes to your credit and your payments are very important. How are you getting paid is very important, right? Because a writing process is not a very black and white, X deliverable, 3 things to be done. That is what it is. It's more of a creative process of multiple minds in a way, working together. And some people may like it, some people may not like it. So how does the next tranche of money come in? When does it come in? Does it come in when everyone has agreed or approved it? Or when I have submitted something? Is there a long conversation period or a incubation period from a creative thinking, jamming perspective before? So if that is what it is, then is there any money coming in during that time? Because the reality is a lot of writers come to the city, are living in difficult conditions. Of course, there are a few who have established themselves or have support from the family, but there are a good amount who don't. And in that case, how do they sustain month on month, right? So those are the things to understand, understand your talent, their past experiences. Another thing that's important to look at when you're looking at a contract is what are they writing about? Is it a simple love story where you don't need to fight so much versus is it based on the life of someone, or it's something that may hurt or may be considered to hurt religious sentiments of a certain caste or a group of people. So it's also, your negotiations somewhere are content centric in a sense. So I don't think it's a very black and white, this is what the contract is, and disassociate yourself with the person, the content, all of that, and just redline. It's about understanding the several aspects of it before you just get into the draft. So those are some very interesting things because you learn about people, their experiences, and they teach you project to project how to manage something better.
Right. That's interesting. You mentioned that deal making and agreement centered around the content, right?
Right.
It sounds to me like as a lawyer, you're not just looking at an agreement and you're not just like, okay, these are how much is the writer getting paid or the talent getting paid? How are they getting paid? When are they getting paid? Right? So you're not just looking at it objectively. You're also delving deep into, okay, how important this project is and how much should you be pushing for protection for the talent.
Correct. Because there are a lot of contracts, and I don't want to bore everyone with a lot of legal jargon, but there are contracts which have representations and warranties which could trigger your termination clause or any financial indemnity obligations. Though you don't see too many producers really triggering those obligations from a finance perspective because they understand, but you will also see situations where you never know, there'll be that one deal which will backfire and you'd wish that you had pushed the envelope on it. So it's important to understand those representations and warranties. And, are you fighting for something that's worth it, or it's just because you want a red line and argue because as a lawyer, you have to look at those 10 points and try protecting your talent. So it's
like, in other words, basically, if a talent is paying you a certain amount, you're not just doing a job because you're expected to, but is it even necessary to do it?
Correct. Exactly. And there have been instances where I've told people that, you probably don't need legal review. Just look at X and Y. And in your case, it's important for you to, because the contract has been fair. There are some producers who have shared fair contracts. And instead of then going into this whole circle of my lawyers and your lawyers and we'll fight, just discuss X, Y, Z as 3 points and see if you can resolve them and just move on. Because it's more efficient to get. And you have to, as a lawyer somewhere, look at the business aspect of it for the company you're working with, the talent you're working with, wherever you are. You can't look at legal in isolation of the business, if I may put it that way.
Fair. In terms of, okay, so you've had a chance to not only work with writers, but you've worked with different kinds of talent. and also you worked with producers, companies, and studios, right? So
Right.
you've represented them also, so you understand both sides of the table very well.
Right.
In terms of, let's take it one step at a time. In terms of, say, a producer trying to get a writer on board. Obviously, producers have backing of, lawyers with a lot of experience, corporate studios giving them the agreements and stuff, right? But from your experience of being on the other side of managing talent and representing them, what do you feel producers, could think about? Because you see that as a recurring theme, like every producer will send you an extra, but you're pushing back on the same things. And if it's just like a few words you put out there, like, hey, producers, please stop doing this, is there anything that comes to your mind?
One thing that comes to my mind is, probably sometimes understand a situation which is not your traditional standard situation. I think that's very important, is to understand the deal at hand and address some of the issues, keeping that in mind. When I was representing talent specifically, I think the biggest pet peeve of mine, if I may call it, is when I had to hear that there is no rationale to this, but it is company mandate. Right? And I was like, guys, come on. And I'd respect the company mandate, because they have also come up with these company mandates keeping in mind the issues they may have faced in the past or what they may have seen in the ecosystem. So totally respect that and want to ensure we are somewhere finding that alignment with that company mandate. But in some instances, you can't make company mandates deal breakers.
Yep.
So it's then for either the producer to understand or the talent to assess the risk by accepting that company mandate. But yeah, that's really what sometimes has been one of my biggest pet peeves.
Got it. Fair. And in terms of, say, a talent, okay, so producers and companies, corporates, they generally have their own legal team, or they are associated with some, like a legal firm.
Correct.
Who are doing this day in, day out, right? Whereas a talent who might just get like a lawyer who's just starting out, or is a lawyer who's out there just representing them, right? What are the things that you would want a talent to keep in mind, given that you said on one level that, sometimes it's just okay to not have a legal review when the draft is, say, favorable on both sides, versus sometimes where you do need a legal review and you need to protect those rights for the talent. So what are the few things that you want writers to keep in mind?
I think for writers also to keep in mind is to understand where are they personally in their life, in their career, right? That's one. The second is who is the opposite party that you're dealing with? Have they in the past been fair with writers? Are they relatively new? Have they not been fair with writers, right? Some of these key finer things, contract or no contract, legal review or not, is in general important while you're interacting or working on it, because a writing process is not a quick in and out generally.
Yep.
It's a long-term relationship that you're building, because you're going to be working with that person. Say if you're working on a series or a film, actually, it's a good 1-2 year at the very least process of working with a person. So it's important to understand it and build that relationship and trust with that producer. The second thing is, when you're looking at it from a contractual perspective, is how important is this project for you? Do you really want to do it creatively? Are the elements of it so exciting that you're ready to let go of XYZ? Right? So assess that aspect of it. Then, of course, it's about understanding the finances, your personal finances, what you really need on a month-on-month basis versus what you want. Right? Depending on the kind of project, you can then decide if you can go down the need route versus the want route. Credits, it's a very important thing, and that's a place where you should avoid really settling, because it somewhere in the long term allows your recognition to be, well, saying you wrote XYZ versus you co-wrote it when that other person may not have actually written the material, right? It dilutes your position in that sense. Now, it's also a part of how you market it yourself, but credit-wise, you would have shared it with someone else, so there would be two people in the market saying this successful film was really written by two of us versus you alone.
Yeah.
And as unfortunately people would have it, or any person, as me as a human, would think about it, that if there's someone much more senior in the ecosystem or someone who's well known in the ecosystem who has also got the credit, you just assume that person has done more chunk of the work than the other one. It's just human mindset, I may want to say. But
Yeah.
In some cases, that could have been the real thing. I'm not saying that. In some cases, it may not have. So it really depends on how much you fight on the top credit or the second credit or the fact that you're getting a credit and at what stage you are also. If it's your first film, by all means, you may want to share it. It's completely a very personal call. Agents, managers, advisors can always guide, but it's a call that the writer themselves need to make, knowing their skill set and who they're working with, who are the partners, how is the collaboration, the nature of it.
Fair. That reminds me, so many times when I'm talking to writers across the board, not just new, but established writers who are out there signing deals, right? One, there is a lot of, hesitation in terms of pushing for what is seemingly fair, but, it's more like, why am I pushing this? Will I lose the deal? Will I,
Correct.
there's this a lack of confidence, so to speak, that I've felt. But then that's obviously changing now, given the education that is out there and the information that's out there. But then there are also sometimes situations around the fact that there will be people who are willing to get a writer on board. There are filmmakers, directors who want to work with certain writers and they really love the concept, but they would not work with them unless the writer is agreeing to give them a shared writer credit.
Correct.
In cases when they have not even written a single word. Okay, let's expand the scope of it, ranging from not written a single word to perhaps throwing around a couple of ideas here and there, as say a director telling a writer maybe the ending could be in a certain different direction, and the writer then spending a few months trying to get that in, and then expecting a full co-written credit.
Correct.
So what is your experience? What does your experience say in terms of what a writer can do in this situation?
I think, again, goes back to the producers you're working with. Do you think they're going to mount it in a way that no one else would do it better? If you think there are others in the market who would take it, I think I've always seen writers saying that, I'll take a few more months and I will go to someone who will give me my fair credit.
Right.
But there are, of course, those writers who are scared, as you rightly said, right? Who would say that, no, let's just go ahead with it because it's my first project. These jitters generally come in your initial stages. As I think writers become more senior, have a few projects under their belt, the conversations are different both the sides of the table. So these conversations, these jitters, I've generally seen with more fresher, younger talent, where people haven't been very open-minded in giving them credits, and vice versa, they've been scared of asking what is due to them or fair to them. And I think you draw a parallel to a fresher who's getting in his first job, right? They will accept most of the terms. They will do it. So I think it's fair for a writer to have those jitters because it's your first gig. It's your initial phases of your career. You're building it there.
Yeah.
Right? Life isn't that fair, if I may put it that way. Right? So it's about finding the right balance and the reasons for accepting something like that versus not. If you feel that the producer's fair will be good in the future, etc. It's a relationship you want to build. It's a call they take. But if you're not getting money, you're not getting the due credit, you're not getting the right players in the market in the sense of a good director on that project or the good actors or the good faces, whatever. If the other pieces of the puzzle are not that enticing, I've seen talent wanting to move away for it.
Yep.
So it really depends on how the package is all together and what then you may want to compromise on versus really looking at it as one individual piece of the whole package.
I see. Got it. And in terms of credits, okay, what is the biggest or the most common negotiation that comes to your mind when I say the word credits, writers, directors, and producers?
I think lately, there is a good sensitization between writers, producers, directors on credits. But initially, I think the biggest problem in contracts was identifying the credit.
Okay.
A lot of contracts would just say you will get due credit. But what is that due credit? I think that visibility, that understanding should be there.
Specify.
Yeah. So if your scope of service is explained, your money for that scope of service is explained, then you have a sense of what you're writing. So what is that credit towards it is an important aspect that needs to be identified. I think let's start at that most basic level. Then what credit to the second stage argument?
Yeah.
The first stage argument is really around the fact that are you really detailing the credit in my contract or not? And I think that's really what I had seen in the initial stages, and continue to see that across some of the contracts.
Got it. And I know you also deal with some tech companies, right, in terms of working with their agreements and deals, right?
Right.
What is your view on today's world when we are, having these conversations with AI, generative art, generative writing? Where does crediting stand there? Where does copyright stand there?
So I think today even the US courts in different parts of US are confused around this one, right? It's really something all of us are, as lawyers, deliberating on, have our own opinions and views on, but it's still something we're waiting to see how the world or the ecosystem changes. Because again, when you say AI, generative AI, all of that, I think the important aspect is where is the core idea coming from? Where are the key elements of your story coming from? Are those things what you're feeding the AI to then write on basis, right? Or what are the terms and conditions on the platform you're using? Are they claiming to own the IP in it? So, and you as a user accepted those terms and conditions. So one part is fairness, the other aspect is contractually what you've already given in. So there are a lot of factors around that which there's an interplay between. And so while there are parts of the world which look at it as still the writer's idea, like I said, they have given the key elements and the aspects of the story, which then the platform is using to create the story or the narrative around, versus situations where the platform has been very clear that if I do X, Y, Z, the copyright's mine, take it or leave it. You can write your own story if you want on your own, right?
Yeah.
So it's important for us to see how that space is evolving and developing right now. But law, it's a very interesting phase in general with the change in technology and copyright issues that surround it, because it's not only stories, right? When it comes to music, when it comes to jingles, all of these things, even as a matter of fact, your photos, your memes, right?
Yeah.
You do see a lot of tech generation around this. Your presentations from a advertising perspective, or your pitch mails, your pitch presentations. I've had my friends saying that we don't need these many people in our company anymore because we have subscribed to XYZ platforms, and that work gets done in a matter of minutes. So it's a very interesting phase where who owns the copyright is a big question. And when you look at it, if your terms and conditions, unfortunately, that you have subscribed to agree, it's very clear that they own the IP.
Oh.
But
can you explain that a bit, like in the context of platforms?
Sure. So contractually, the way we're talking of writers' contracts, right? When you subscribe to a platform to get some services, there are terms and conditions which we often scroll to the bottom, click OK, and go ahead, because who wants to read all of that? And I'm as guilty as that. I've done it several times.
But what other option do you have? It's not like
don't use it.
Oh, don't use it. That's the only option. Right?
Don't use it, right?
Okay.
It's right there. And those terms and conditions where you have agreed to assigning the intellectual property in those in the IP that they create. Of course, Indian courts haven't deliberated on these contracts in that much detail, so it'll be important from a jurisprudence perspective to see it. As to as you correctly said, you don't have an option. You are in a way coerced into accepting it. But another view, like I said, is don't use it. Do it yourself, right? So
that's interesting, right? Because if it's something like Google, right, which
Correct.
is I can't imagine a world where you're not using at least a single product, especially if you're living in a metro and accessing different service, right? At least a single Google product you're using on daily basis, right? How does in the world where everything that you upload can be used by some AI to, as a base material for it to learn, and then in future come up with something else? Like, for example, if I'm a poet, right, and I'm posting my stories on Instagram, Facebook, and any other social media platform, right? So that data exists everywhere, right? And now this generative AI is scraping the web to pick up those pieces of content to learn what I do and what other artists are capable of doing, right? So where does like accepting those one-sided terms and conditions play in all of this?
So it's again different, right? When you're talking of your Facebooks, your Instagram, your platforms where you are uploading your content.
Right.
It's very different from the platforms we are talking of, which are AI-based platforms, which are creating content for you. I think let's understand that segregation on it, right? That's first. The second is, of course, the AI-based platforms which are creating content based on your content that's out there in the public domain, really, um, will be learning from your content. And it's this is the kind of conversations that are happening out there, right? Which you are seeing litigations in the US where parts of someone's work are picked up or learned from, and AI is creating content based on that. And that's exactly the kind of litigation you're seeing. So it's important to see how the jurisprudence really pans out. But it's a matter of time we will be addressing some of these in India as well.
Yeah, that's what I look forward to, that, right? In terms of figuring it out. And now that also brings me back to being a writer, right? Now, okay, so in this new world, we are dealing with software that is capable of picking up what a writer or an artist does
Correct.
and recreating that and learning from it, right? But in the offline world, there is also that risk that exists, right? Say a writer is sitting across a producer or even a co-writer or any other person on this planet, and they share their idea, okay? They have narrated the story or the script that they're working on, and tomorrow that person goes out there and, just take something from it. I'm not saying like,
Yeah,
okay,
we've all been witness to this. This
yeah,
has happened. We've had talent come and complain that, hey, this was an idea I pitched to them,
yeah,
right? And I think that's why we always, as lawyers, keep advising, please write down your concepts, your like an idea till it's not really written down in in a format that can be either registered with the SWA or proved that this is created by you is still an idea. It cannot be copywritten. Let's go to the fundamental of it, right? So if the AI is scraping through content that's out there that is owned by you, because content on those platforms that you create and you upload is owned by you still, then you have a case of, litigation right there. But in a situation where you're talking in real time, where you have not put pen to paper to your ideas, your concepts, they're still at a very nascent stage. They are not in a place where they put pen and paper and hence not copywritten. Uh, you are the one at loss. And which is why we always advise talent that, hey, if you've had this brainstorming meeting, follow it up with an email saying, hey, it was a great chat. We discussed X, Y, Z. So it's captured that.
so it's captured on email.
Yeah, it's there. It's a written form capturing of it in some sense that it's not yours, it's mine.
Yeah. No, that's pretty insightful, right? Like, just knowing that if you are in a meeting and you're narrating your idea, or even if it's just a one-liner that you're throwing at anyone, it's always better to record that conversation in some form or the other so that you can point back to it.
One-liners are generally not really broader concepts. They're just one-liners. Copyright and something like that could be tricky.
Yeah.
But if you have a few pages of an idea that you have formulated and shared with someone, or a paragraph or two which has your key essential elements, your your beginning, middle, end, those kind of things would still have some meat to it.
Got it. Fair. And now, recently there's been this whole conversation around Yashika Dutt and Made in Heaven, right? Like, where she claims that, okay, Made in Heaven was inspired from a book and her story, and the makers of Made in Heaven had a very different perspective on it, right?
Correct.
Now, while that is happening, and I'm guessing like at some point lawyers will get involved and they'll figure it out, and we'll see what really comes of it. What really came to my mind at that point was that, there are so many authors out there who have their lives written in books or different on Instagrams or any form of consumable media, right?
Yeah.
And anyone can read that and recreate something. Now, I'm not saying that sometimes they're doing it deliberately. Sometimes it just happens that you may have read a book a few years earlier, and then you're writing something and it just manifests itself without you be able to recall that you read this somewhere.
Correct.
So, but it still begs the question, one, how does that author or the person whose material is out there protect themselves?
That's a really important, very valid question, and it is, as you correctly said, sometimes tricky. And we know this, that writers read a lot. So sometimes you may feel it's a brainwave, but it could have been something in a very small form that you could be writing from a recollection of something you may have read.
Yeah.
It really, let's break this up, right? Is it something based on someone's life? Is it something that's more in the sense of you have read and you've got a seed of something more bigger from there? In the latter case, I don't think really there is any credit, etc., because you are still building an entire world or universe around that idea that you have read.
Yep.
Versus in a situation where it's based on someone's life. I think if it's based on someone's life, you have to go down the road of also understanding, is it in public domain, is it not in public domain?
What is public domain?
So when I say public domain, it doesn't mean that if you find it on Google, it's public domain. Let's get that out, right? If you find it on Google, it still could be someone's copywritten material. What I mean specifically when I say public domain is either someone had copyright in it and X number of years have lapsed and then it falls into the public domain. Or
I think it's 60 years for India.
Yeah, it depends really on, in some cases, depend the kind of material you're talking of. It's either, if we're talking of a film, it is 60 years. If it's about someone's life, it's 60 years after their death. So which is why I'm not getting into the nitty-gritties of that. But
so there are defined
there are defined time periods when it comes to it. But when you're talking about a situation, like if it's a newspaper article, that's the public domain. It's printed. If it's a judgment, it's material that's out there in the public domain for you to use. So, but if it's a book, it's not. If it is a story of Nehru or Gandhi who have passed away over 60 years ago, then it's material out there in the public domain. So it really depends on what you're talking about. Is the material in public domain? Is the material not in public domain? If it's not in public domain, you generally need to take either an NOC or approvals or you still should give them credit. There could be a financial aspect attached to it or not attached to it. It really depends on the person who's agreeing to give you the rights to use their life rights or a part of their life's rights away. So
got it. And what can a writer do in that instance, right? For example, say I as a writer have written a script and I didn't realize that I have taken up somebody else's material when I was writing, like it's not a brainwave. It was something that I read years ago and it just made it to my work, which I have signed an agreement as a warranty that I claim to be my original in an agreement with the producer. What happens to me as a writer?
You need to take a little ownership when it comes to your work, right?
Okay.
If it is something that's inspired from someone's life, you have to take ownership towards that. If you haven't given them due credit, the reality is, question yourself when this comes to you. Have I read about it? Is there something I have heard of? I think Google or just search engines are enough out there for you to type in a few words to tell you, hey, yeah, it's this person's life. So a lot of times, if it's based on a biography or like a public figure, I think the answer will be right out there for you.
Yeah.
So we should also, as representative of writers, look at those kind of aspects, because it's not that one side is always wrong. The other side could also be at fault, and it could not be intentional, but it can happen. So when you do read stuff and it sticks with you, maybe put pen to paper and see where it has come from and keep it as you're noting in your book. It's not easy, but that could be something to do.
Fair. Now let's flip the situation a bit, right? There are people who understand how the legal system works. They are they have such good information and knowledge about what typically happens in a creative process, that they are also in a position to exploit it, where they can lay false claim on someone that this was potentially something that, they had created, or they had written. Like, for example, titles, right? Something that I often hear about is that, okay, if a particular event has happened, there'll be people who just run to copyright titles, even if they have no intent to create anything around it. It's just that they're digging a copyright on that title, so that if tomorrow somebody does, then they can, put up a fight or sell the title rights or whatever, right? So do you recall any instances from, people exploiting the legal system to this extent?
So there are protections under the legal system when it comes to these things, where you actually are not creating something, but you're just registering. It's similar in the domain name space, where your intent is to just hoard those domain names versus actually utilize or create business on
Right.
it, right? And there are protections and safeguards under law. It's about understanding what you're talking about specifically, and then accordingly exploring your options with the relevant bodies, with the relevant people you're talking to about, or in the worst case situation, sending a notice towards this effect that, hey, you're not using this.
Yeah.
You have, if there is no intention to use it, please allow us to utilize it. But yeah, it is a tricky situation. We have seen people hoarding on this, and unfortunately, there isn't enough jurisprudence around this or litigation around these kind of things in India just yet.
Got it. Oh wow, that's assuring.
No, but I think it's a factor of a few negotiation skills around it as well, right? And we have seen a lot of producers or writers changing the names of titles if they are similar to what's already registered, or if there's someone who's making something. We've also seen on the flip side projects with same or very similar names being released also, or subject matters. So it's very nuanced. What is the name? Is it a generic thing? So it's depends on what you're talking about, and accordingly taking a decision that you can still go ahead with this name because it's something very generic in nature
Yeah.
versus something which is more specific. Like you will see enough stories around, common events that may have happened, like the 26/11. Right, you will see several stories which have similar titles around that.
Yeah.
So it could have occurred and someone could have registered the name, but there will be different forms of content because that's not something that you can hoard on, if that's what you're referring.
It's such a problem.
Yeah, it's a prominent event. You can't stop someone to use something.
Around.
You'll just have to word or build the title around that, but you can still very much use it.
Got it. That's interesting. So now let's talk about the nuances that you explained, right? Like you've been out there not only just closing deals, but you've also been part of litigations. Are there any anecdotes that you can share without taking names, of course? Something that really changed your perspective towards things or towards how things work?
I think my experience working at my earlier place where we represented writers and directors as a whole has changed my perspective in a very different way from working at a law firm where we were repping studios and producers to working with talent and repping their side to again coming back and working at a law firm, right? It's been quite a journey.
Right? Let's break that down. So you were first working with a law firm where you were working for the folks that are signing the checks, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So you on many levels had an upper hand.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
Then you switched roles. You joined Tulsi and you started representing writers, directors, and actors, producers, talent, whatever. Right? You're working with people who are now taking those checks and getting those contracts. Right? So, if you look at it as a pyramid, you have stepped one step down the ladder. Right?
Correct.
Now go on.
So yeah, that's been quite the interesting, difficult journey because it's always easier to say it's company mandate, right? Versus fighting and justifying why you need something from a talent's perspective.
Right.
So, tables changed, and I totally did understand each side of the table in that case. And it was easier for me to then navigate through those situations because once you have a sense of... So I would like to say that there's never a situation where there's one person who's the victim and the other one's the goal. I think we moved from that era, if I may put it that way.
Yep.
Writers also or directors also have a stronger hold to an extent when it comes to working with producers or platforms. It really depends on their skill set as well. So it's a situation of negotiations, sitting on a table, understanding as adults how to get what are your must-haves, as I said, and what are not your must-haves in that way. So that's really where I have learned the fact that there's no right or wrong when it comes to it. It's about how you negotiate and what you really want and what you really can get.
Got it.
There are tough ones. There are situations where I have been on calls where the lawyer on the other side has said, "How dare you ask because you're representing a writer?" Yeah, there have been those, but I think the ecosystem as a whole has matured, and there are the same lawyers representing writers and producers at the end of the day. So they respect both the sides of the table. And I think that's what you see across board now. So there's a lot more understanding, respect, and mutual will to find a solution.
Got it. That's really good to know, actually. And I'm glad that, as an industry, as an ecosystem, things are maturing and evolving.
Right.
I do have a couple of questions from some of the writers around me who wanted to just, ask you a few things. It's generally the producers who share NDAs with the writers. This writer had a question: why can't it be the other way around?
So, okay, let's understand this. There's nothing stopping you as a writer from sharing an NDA with a producer. They may opt to sign it, they may opt not to sign it. Then it's your decision if you want to share your material with them or not.
Got it.
So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is NDAs are shared by producers to writers when they are sharing their own material. When material as a writer I am submitting to a producer, you don't sign an NDA from the producer side because it's not confidential information of the producer. It's your confidential information. So understand what you're signing, which is a very, very important aspect of it.
Which brings me to what are the things that, say, a writer or any talent should look for in an NDA? If you read that, then you're better off not signing it.
NDA, release forms, any of it. Avoid a situation where someone says you cannot pitch it to anyone else for 3, 6, 8, 12 months. Because that just means there is one person reading it and you have to wait for that long. Content and the ecosystem, the way you work in today, is changing so fast. And I have seen this a couple of times, is if there is one project that's being pitched, you will end up in the next 6 months seeing a very similar project being pitched and your content will become stale. So from that perspective, be mindful about how long you give anyone exclusivity in reading your content. If you ever
Is that even advisable to begin with?
I would not advise it, but look at it from a studio's perspective. If you've pitched it to 4 people, they have invested time in reading it. There could be an instance where they've said, hey, yes, I want to use it, but you've taken it to someone else and not informed the studio as well. So you have to find that fine balance. I would not advise it, but if they insist on it, ensure the timeline is very short and ensure you're checking in with them to understand if they have passed on it or not. I would not give exclusivity for such a long duration. A couple of weeks is understandable.
Yeah.
A couple of months is definitely not.
Yeah, because it almost sounds like, you're holding, I don't know what the right word for it is, but you're holding somebody from doing more work, right,
Correct.
in the market, right? Which sounds to be very unethical, to be honest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so that's from the NDA perspective. But then that begs the question, say a writer chooses not to sign the NDA, right? What are the mechanisms available to a writer to protect the material?
So when you say that a producer says, I will not sign an NDA, the writer should have the very beginning stage, share and upload your each version and register your versions with the SWA. I think an SWA does a fantastic job in that sense of keeping records of each version if you submit it with them. So that is one thing. The second option is to send it to a friend. So you're creating a date or a timeline to when you created your material. And if someone tomorrow really goes ahead and breaches it, infringes on your IP, you have proof that I had sent it to you on X date. In the initial days, people used to give physical copies. Very little proof really around that, right? Yeah. But today, there is an ability to send it over a digital medium. And you can always have proof that I have sent it to you. So you'll have to just be vigilant after you've shared it with XYZ people. Keep a note of it. And tomorrow or in the near future, if you come across someone who's created content who you have submitted to and it's similar to yours, there is a conversation you have a right to have with them because you have proof that you had shared your material with them.
Got it. So register with SWA, make sure there's some sort of proof of,
submission.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And how important are these disclaimers that are put, at the bottom of the email? This email is confidential, intended for.
It's always a good to have, right? It's good to have, and we've recommended some of our talent to say that, or over email say, this is my confidential information. Request you not to share it with anyone else other than within your organization, because approvals are not from one person. So we have to be mindful of that also.
Got it.
So these are a couple of things we do tend to try. But again, it's a matter of seeing how courts look at it.
Fair. That's good to know. Um, Speaking of SWA, I feel like a lot of people, even today, despite SWA being so, available online in terms of, just sharing, it's just out there sharing information. There are seminars that are being held. A lot of information that's out there in terms of, knowing what to register, when to register,
Right.
and how good of a practice it is. There's still some writers who do feel, or they still question what the importance of an organization like SWA, right? Often writers come up to me and ask me, like, is it necessary to register? Is it necessary to have a membership? Do we need to copyright it? Is there no government or another way of doing it? So what is your view on that?
So there is a government way of doing it. So let's break it from the very basic of the copyright law. Copyright law does not need any registration or application for the purpose of something being copywritten. Copyright vests from the day the work is created.
Got it.
So, which is why it goes back to my point of creating an email trail, right? You either mail it to yourself knowing what date you had created the material, or share it with a friend. And each version, you could keep a track of that in that fashion. That's good enough to prove the material was created on X day and continues to. That's exactly what SWA does. They give you a registration number. It's more of an authority which tells you X is the day you registered it on with me. It's not a must-have. It's a good-to-have practice.
Got it.
Similarly, Copyright Board, under the Copyright Act, there is an application that can be made to the Copyright Office. It's a more longer process. There's a higher cost attached to it. But if you want to do it, that's an option for you to do as well for your scripts.
Got it.
So there are other options out there. It's just time and again, SWA has 4 scripts that are registered or for their members help to stepping in to find ways to mediate and solve problems. They are not a government authority where they can give you orders, but they have worked in the industry and have a certain amount of influence with a few producers, which allows them or enables them in helping resolve disputes. There is no guarantee, but there is at least a certain amount of comfort because they've done it for so many years.
Fair. Now, that makes complete sense. And speaking of SWA, and now we have the WGA in the West, and there's a strike that's happening. What is your take on, AI writers? And it sounds like we've talked about this, but I want to ask you specifically where, okay, if you are a writer today, how worried do you think a writer should be given the developments and advancements happening in the world of AI? And what is your view on the WGA strike altogether?
The writer should be just as worried as a lawyer could be.
Oh, really? Okay.
Honestly, right?
Yeah.
If AI is reading and learning that fast the way they are, and they can write a screenplay, I'm sure they can infer what is written in the law as well. Or any other business, you're seeing robotics in doing surgeries. There is advancement of technology, but probably the old school in me still believes that replacing complete human intervention in doing any of these things is not completely possible.
Right.
So that's really where I still stand when it comes to that aspect of it. And when it comes to the WGA strike, it's sad that it's taken this long. Even when now actors were on strike along with the writers, there are 2 ways to look at it. One is that the industry as a whole is really in a lot of trouble, that they could continue the strike for this long and not come to a consensus because they don't have that much to share. Or the other way is maybe we are giving away too many rights in contracts to production houses, studios, etc. When it comes from an actor's perspective, writers still have their scripts written, right?
Yeah.
But this is an interesting show that I had seen, one episode of Black Mirror, where they showed that when we've given away as actors, have given away their rights to using their likeness, their caricature, all of it that we agreed to blindly in a contract, how a platform has used those and created a version in the animated world.
Oh, wow.
And a show is based on someone who is actually not acting there, right? And it's interesting. It really like got my wheels running around it when I started looking at contracts from that light. And it's not like impossible. We're not that far away when you're creating content in that nature and it's out there. But it'll be an interesting thing to see from that perspective as well. But coming back to the WGA strike, it's rather sad to see that they have been on the picket line for so long, asking for what's fair. And it's not that it's not something that was given to them, right? TV gave them those things. Moving to digital, which we thought would be a great advancement, has actually taken them back 10 steps from a financial perspective. So it's somewhere coming from a place of it being unfair as well. Yeah. So it's also about maybe platforms or studios re-looking at commercial models as a whole.
Yeah.
Maybe you will have OTT having ads because that's a monetization model, right? That's where TV could make that sort of money and then in return give it to writers, different players in the industry, basically. So it'll be an interesting thing to see how they find that fair balance between producers, studios, writers, platforms, actors, all of it.
No, that's very true. Yeah, I really look forward to how things are going to evolve on that front. What I do also hope is that, we've had guests on this podcast who are writers, and the stories that they had to tell about the economics of where they either started out or what they're getting paid right now as well. It's just heartbreaking.
It is.
It is.
It's
just heartbreaking. And, there are young writers who come to me and ask me, should I become a writer? And I'm like, how do I answer this question? Because from the outside, it feels like a world which is so always in the news. There's a little bit of glamour, whatnot, right? But from the inside, it is one of the toughest industries to be a part of, right? And on top of that, there's pretty much an existential threat right now, So it's an interesting time to pursue this, right?
It is a very interesting time. And I think with every stage in life, right, with tech having advanced, there has been a threat to humanity in general when it comes to it. But I think at each stage, people have proved that they are more useful in a lot of ways, right, or have adapted to the tech that's already there. There have been revolutions to this for years together.
Yeah.
So I don't think the existence of a specific sort of career will go away. It's just about each person not becoming complacent and finding ways to be more creative in that case, or innovative, to find ways to work or add value, if I may put it that way, in addition to what the tech is giving.
Fair. Yeah, that's like adding value, I think, is the right way to look at it, right? I think the more a person can add value to an ecosystem, the more rewarding it is for them.
Absolutely.
And if they are not getting rewarded, then we have people like you. Awesome. Okay, so another question that was there was, this person asked, what happens if somebody is humming a tune on screen or in a recording? How does that play out in the copyright world?
So when it comes to music and underlying works, etc., there is a certain of copyright in even a tune that's being hummed, right, or being whistled. It's about how much they are using it. Does it fall within the fair use principle or not? There are nuances at each stage. Though it's a smaller act, there are a lot of nuances when it comes to the copyright law, and how you're utilizing the work is a very important aspect to understand. So it's not a black and white answer, but there is copyright in this kind of material as well, as where I'd love to leave it. So understand what and how you're using. Is the song already in public domain? That's also an important thing to understand before you decide if you can or cannot use it.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. And how does this play out in memes? Today we have a whole culture of taking bits from here and there, mixing them up and sharing it online, right?
Right. No, again, it goes to the fact of fair use. Is it commercial? Are they making any commercial benefit out of it? Is it used for an ad of a project? Is it just satire, or is it amounting to defamation of some? Right? So it depends on the meme. How is it impacting someone? Is it hurting a set of religion? What is the content? Is it hurting the religious sentiments of a person? Is it defaming someone? is it actually amounting to copyright infringement because it's not amounting to fair use?
Got it.
It really depends on that. And if it's for advertising purposes as well. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to like push something that memes are like, I think, the new market of like pushing something that you want to write. So I think it's good to see that. I'm glad that we had this little chat, and I'm hoping that a lot of the questions that I asked and things that we spoke about help writers who are starting out, also give perspective to producers where writers are coming from, which in more often than not they do. But when somebody's just entering the industry and young producer who's joined a corporate, they're the gatekeepers, right? They should understand like.
Absolutely. I think it's important for each player to understand the opposite side to work. It's like any other business, if I may put it that way. If the two sides don't understand each other, it's not a good relationship to be in.
Yeah.
So that's really where it is. But thank you so much for having me.
I am glad that we had this chat. And dear listeners, I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please do check out our other episodes.